So, welcome everybody to the books of Jeremiah and Lamentations this evening in the Old Testament. Jeremiah is just as we can see from the next screen. Jeremiah was around in Judah during the time you can see down here at the in the fourth column during the time when Judah was taken into exile. So around 600 BC to 580 BC. So he went through that kind of traumatic experience of the last days of Judah. Israel have already been taken off into captivity by the Assyrians, and then they stayed away under the Babylonians. But Judah was still surviving for all those years afterwards, and Jeremiah is, in a sense, that one of those last prophets that was around during that tremendous time of upheaval when the Babylonians came in and they took over Jerusalem, and they destroyed the city and the temple and took them all away into captivity. And so you can see that Jeremiah he starts here under the last few kings. Well, he actually starts under King Josiah up here at 640 to 608, and then he is in that reign, but he also then goes into captivity with the Babylonians and so on, and so he's around just after that as well. So tremendous kind of period of change. So last time we looked at you can see here the prophets that were around during that time as well. Nahum over here in Israel in captivity, and then Habakkuk and Zephaniah. The ones that we missed that we'll come back to are Amos, Hosea, Jonah, and Micah. That will be next week, which are the prophets for Israel before they go into captivity. So we've done it in slightly strange order before we cover some of the others. But you can see kind of the time period that we're talking about for Jeremiah, one of the major prophets, because it's a big book, because he had so much to write. It kind of takes the same form, if you remember, like Isaiah, where Jeremiah prophesies about judgment because of the rebellion and the idolatry and the injustice of the people. They've rebelled against God. They've allowed idolatry because they are worshiping foreign gods. The Canaanite gods as well as Yahweh and so on. But there's also a lot of injustice as well, where they're not looking after the widows and the orphans and foreigners that are in their land and all these other people. And so God pronounces his judgment. They've broken the covenant arrangement that they should have kept under their agreements with God. And he said, you got to do these things. And if you do them, then there'll be blessings. If you don't, there's consequences and there will be judgment. But it also speaks, like Isaiah, about hope, that even though there is this time of judgment that's coming and you'll be taken away, there is a future hope because God's promises are always true. And there will be a future kingdom that will be full of the faithfulness to God and justice and peace for all peoples. And we'll see that as we unfold the book a little bit tonight. It's interesting because it's actually written by this guy called Baruch. In chapter 36, we're told how the book of Jeremiah has come to be. So it's written by this guy Baruch. So it says here in chapter 36, in the fourth year of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Take a scroll and write on it all the words I have spoken to you concerning Israel, Judah, and all the other nations from the time I began speaking to you in the reign of Josiah until now. So that's like a 20-year time period. So Jeremiah has to remember all these things that God has given to him, and he's told to write them down on this, or get this guy Baruch. Perhaps when the people of Judah hear about every disaster I plan to inflict on them, they will each turn from their wicked ways. Then I will forgive their wickedness and their sin. So Jeremiah called Baruch, son of Neriah, and while Jeremiah dictated all the words the Lord had spoken to him, Baruch wrote them on the scroll. So you can kind of get the picture of how this comes about. Then Jeremiah told Baruch, I am restricted. I am not allowed to go to the Lord's temple. So you go to the house of the Lord on the day of fasting and read to the people from the scroll the words of the Lord that you wrote as I dictated. Read them to all the people of Judah who come in from their towns. Perhaps they will bring their petition before the Lord and will each turn from their wicked ways, for the anger and wrath pronounced against this people by the Lord are great. Baruch son of Neriah did everything Jeremiah the prophet told him to do. At the Lord's temple, he read the words of the Lord from the scroll. In the 9th month of the 5th year of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, a time of fasting before the Lord was proclaimed for all the people in Jerusalem and those who come from the towns of Judah. From the room of Gemariah, son of Shaphan, the secretary, which was in the upper courtyard at the entrance of the new gate of the temple, Baruch read all the people at the Lord's temple the words of Jeremiah from the scroll. And so you kind of get the picture. And so what Baruch has done here is he's taken not just these words of Jeremiah, but he kind of writes this anthology, if you like. He kind of intersperses the historical narrative and the story that's going around in Jeremiah's time with these words from, or these prophetic words from Jeremiah. And so what you get is this kind of story as you go through Jeremiah with the prophetic words that are given at different times, with a little bit of kind of historical narrative in between. And they're written to kind of portray Jeremiah as this messenger of God's justice, but also a messenger of God's mercy as well. And so you get this kind of account that is somewhat different to many of the other accounts. So you kind of get in between, some of the things that Jeremiah has to do and so on. And you really see the heart of Jeremiah in all of this as well. So it's not just the heart of God. So let's kind of dive into the book. So in chapter 1, we get the really the kind of outline, if you like. The word of the Lord came to me in verse 4. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Alas, sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak. I am too young. Sounds a little bit like Moses when he was called by God in the burning bush, and he said, I don't know how to speak. But the Lord said to me, do not say I am too young, for you must go to everyone I send you to and say whatever I command you. That's the role of the prophetic. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth and said to me, I put my words in your mouth. Sort of a similar analogy, if you like, to Isaiah, where he reached in the coal and forgave the sin, because Isaiah comes to God recognizing the sin of the people. Here he's saying, I'm going to put my words in your mouth, so I'm going to touch your mouth. See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. And in that verse 10, you can see the two aspects really that are at play in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah, you've got the judgment of God, which is to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, because the time has now come. The opportunity for you to repent has now passed, and there is a kind of a line in the sand that God draws, and he says, enough is enough. I've given you so many opportunities, but your hearts are so hard that you're not going to repent. So judgment comes. But also there is the hope and the mercy of God to build and to plant as well. And that even when God's judgment comes, it always comes with that opportunity and that hope and that plan of God that brings about a resurrection, if you like, and a rebuilding and a deepening and a new beginning in God's kingdom. Chapters 1 to 24 then are the writings of Jeremiah before the people go into exile. Chapter 25 is kind of one of the key chapters, but he explains to them that they've broken the covenant. They keep on breaking the covenant, that they're in this binding covenantal relationship that they went into with free will, but that God, there are consequences in the covenant. If you sign an agreement like this and your forefathers signed it on your behalf, then there are consequences if you don't keep the covenant. And it was laid out in Deuteronomy, etc., in 28, really clearly about this is what's going to happen if you break this arrangement with God. Do you still want to do it? And they all went, yes, yes, yes. And what they done is that they adopt Canaanite worship. So there's so many other gods that they worship, and Jeremiah likens this to kind of like a prostitute, that God is called their husband, but they then go and flaunt themselves in prostitution with all these other gods, and they're promiscuous because they keep on going back to worshiping all these other gods of the Canaanites, even though they kind of then keep coming back to Yahweh every now and again, but not solely. They just kind of treat Yahweh as being on an equal par with all these other gods as well. And not only that, that Jeremiah also keeps raising the issue that the leadership is corrupt, that you can tell the faithfulness of a leadership by the way that they look after those that are on the margins, those that really have no voice, those the way that they operate in social justice to the people, all people. And Jeremiah keeps on saying, you don't protect the widows, you don't protect the orphans, you don't protect the foreigners living in the land of Judah, and you just look down on them and you mistreat them. And God won't stand for that. The way that you treat the least is the way that basically reflect your relationship with God, and that the leadership just don't care anymore. It kind of culminates. There's a famous in chapter 7, which is called the Temple Sermon, where it all kind of comes together. And just to look at a little snippet of that here, where it says, verse 9, will you steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury, burn incense to Baal, and follow other gods that you have not known? And then come and stand before me in this house which bears my name, and say, we are safe to do all these detestable things? Has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers to you? But I have been watching, declares the Lord. And then he carries on. He says, when you tell this to them, they will not listen to you. When you call to them, they will not answer. Therefore say to them, this is the nation that has not obeyed the Lord its God or responded to corruption. Truth has perished. It has vanished from their lips. Cut off your hair and throw it away. Take up a lament on the barren heights. For the Lord has rejected and abandoned this generation that is under his wrath. And so we kind of see that, that God has been watching what they're doing, and you can't just carry on doing whatever you feel like doing when you're in a covenant relationship with God. And so judgment time has come because God has been watching, and God has been, in a sense, judging and saying, you know what, it's not going to carry on because you are bearing my name. What you do, other people look at what you do, other nations look at what you do, and you're doing it in a sense in my name. And if you're not representing me, then what's the point? I'd rather not have you around. And so in chapter 25, Jeremiah then prophesies that the Babylonians are going to come and be the instruments of God's justice. It says, therefore, in verse 8, the Lord Almighty says this, because you have not listened to my words, I will summon all the peoples of the north and my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, declares the Lord, and I will bring them against this land and its inhabitants and against all the surrounding nations. I will completely destroy them and make them an object of horror and scorn, an everlasting ruin. I will banish them from the sound of joy and gladness, the voices of bride and bridegroom, the sound of millstones and the light of the lamp. This whole country will become a desolate wasteland, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. And you remember, if you've read it, the other prophets around were just saying, yeah, you'll go into exile, but it'll be for a couple of years and then you'll be able to come back. But Jeremiah said, no, it's going to outlive me. It's going to be 70 years before you'll be able to come back. And this is all before Babylon comes sweeping down and metes out God's justice. And so you have that pivotal moment. And then moving forwards, you've got from chapters 26 to 45, you've got the kind of 26 to 29. Jeremiah is just desperate to get the people to turn back. So God has shown him what's going to happen. And he's hoping against hope that if he begs the people and they turn like Nineveh did when Jonah went to see them, and they turn back, and then God may relent on what he's going to do. And he has such outpouring of his heart towards the people and towards the city. and he's just desperate for them to turn back. And then in going to the third one in 34 to 45, it just explains in detail the kind of the siege and the destruction of Jerusalem. But in the midst of that, you have in these verses in chapters, well, it starts at 29 and then goes through to 33, this you know, unexpected in a sense hope for the future, that even though everything's gonna come crashing down around them, that God has still not given up on them. And so you see this kind of transition in 29, which is, one of those famous verses that we know, which you'll see in a minute. So this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. And it's quite surprising. He says, build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. So he's saying, like, don't keep looking back. Don't wait for me to come to gather you back. Go and stay, be content with where you are in exile, which is a really kind of strange thing to say in some ways. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord. As I said, they were saying that, within a couple of years they'll be returning. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. So often when we say, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord in verse 11, we actually take it out of context. Its context here is a place of exile, a place of, despondency, and a place of where there is a lack of hope. But God's saying, you know what, my promises are always true. And even though things are looking so bleak for you right now, I know that the plans that I already have for you as a nation to bring you back, and that I will fulfill my purposes amongst you. And then in the midst of this too, we have, so that's 29, but in the midst of that, in verse 31, we have the new covenant, which is, so it's interesting that these moments of hope come in the midst of this despair and this exile, this where Jerusalem has been destroyed or is about to be destroyed, and the loss that comes with that. Jerusalem was everything to them. It was the place of the temple. It was, we'll see this in Lamentations. It was the place of, the city of God. It was where God's presence on earth dwelt. And you remove that, you allow that to be destroyed. That's like everything is destroyed amongst them. That the whole culture goes, their religion goes, everything goes, because God has now abandoned us. If we're going into exile, we're going far away from where God's presence is. And how are we going to survive there, because God is not with us anymore, and what we're going to do and how are we going to do it. And so everything was just kind of washed away in that moment. But in Jeremiah 31, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. Notice this refers to Israel as well as to Judah. It will not be like a covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them. There's that imagery again of relational, calling the people of Israel, the people of Judah, like prostitutes and so on, but God as being a faithful husband to them. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, Know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. This passage here is the one that we use or we remember every time we take communion. Jesus said, "This is my body broken for you. This is my blood of the new covenant." This is what Jesus was talking about. He said, "When I died on the cross, I brought in this new covenant relationship." So when the temple curtain was torn in two, it's this picture of no longer will they teach their neighbor or say no, because they will all know me. They'll all have access to me. I will be, I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God and they will be my people. It's because it's internalized, because our sins have been forgiven, our wickedness has been forgiven, and it's been taken away by Jesus on the cross. And that's why Jesus at the Last Supper reminded them of this new covenant that was coming and was now going to be fulfilled in Jesus's name. And that's why we say, this is my blood of the new covenant, shed for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. It reminds us that Jesus brought in this new covenant, um, which doesn't negate all the other covenants, because God is true to his covenantal word, but it kind of supersedes, in a sense, for the time being, the other covenants. So God will still fulfill the other covenants. So there is still a future for Israel, and but that future will be through Christ. But that's another story, and that's not for Jeremiah. So it brings this in, and Jeremiah had these amazing words that Jesus referred to as the new covenant in the Lord's Supper and so on. And then finishing off Jeremiah, we come to these chapters 46 to 51. These are chapters that are poems, really, about how God's going to use Babylon not only to judge Israel or Judah, but also the other nations around. And so we see Egypt and Philistia, Moab, Ammon, Edom, and so on. They're all going to be under judgment by God, because God doesn't just see Israel in its uniqueness, in a sense, and just look after Israel, but God is the King of the universe. He is the King above all kings and Lord above all lords. And so God also will judge all these other nations and use Babylon to judge them and their attitudes towards God and their attitudes towards the people of Israel as well, and and therefore towards God as the God of Israel. And God then also says, and he leaves the last couple of chapters to this, the longest kind of judgments, if you like, are about how God will also judge Babylon. So because Babylon is being used by God to bring justice and to bring his judgment to the other nations, but then Babylon is also responsible for how it does that as an instrument of God's judgment. And when they do it in a way that is proud and arrogant and boastful and everything else, and full of idolatry as well, that they're claiming that this is happening because of the other gods and so on, then God will also judge Babylon, and they will come under the same standards as everybody else. But the book ends in with this amazing little story right at the end. So it's like Barak or Jeremiah, they can't leave it with just we've been carted into exile and that's the end, and we're waiting for the end of the 70 years. Right at the very end is this note of hope, because it finishes like this: in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the year of our Marduk became king of Babylon, on the 25th day of the 12th month, he released Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and freed him from prison. He spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat of honor higher than those of the other kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiachin put aside his prison clothes and for the rest of his life ate regularly at the king's table. Day by day, the king of Babylon gave Jehoiachin a regular allowance as long as he lived till the day of his death. And that's how it ends. So it ends on this kind of note, if you like, of hope. This note of well, there's something else coming, that God is still, blessing his people like this. Why would the king of Babylon just do this and set Jehoiachin, in a sense, higher than any of the other kings who were with him in Babylon from all the other nations? It's because of the favor of God, and God hasn't abandoned them, hasn't forgotten them, and still has a plan for them. And so that's kind of the book of Jeremiah as a sort of an oversight. That's really the message. And it's full of this emotion of Jeremiah that's trying to desperately persuade his people to turn back from their way and to avert the disaster. But as we see, is unsuccessful and is then, caught up in the whole thing as well, going into exile with the people. Book of Lamentations is generally ascribed to Jeremiah, but it doesn't actually specifically say who the author is. But many people believe that it was Jeremiah. It certainly fits with kind of the timeline and the kind of the note and so on. But basically, it's five chapters, which are five poems, and they reflect on the grief of the siege of Jerusalem and the exile. And it's all focused towards this one time where the Babylonians come in and they besiege the city, they um, destroy the city and the temple, and they take everybody away. And as I said, the loss for the city is absolutely catastrophic for the people of God. This was their promised land that was promised through the Abrahamic covenant and so on. It's the place of the temple that was promised through the Davidic covenant, and David and then Solomon built it, the place of worship. But it's also the very presence of God. And it's like, as God left us, as God now abandon us, because they saw God not as everywhere as such, but that God was the God of this geographical area. And if you take away the temple and you take away the tabernacle, you take away the presence of God on earth. And so, what are you kind of left with as the people of Israel? What kind of you're removing the very core of their culture and their identity. They were built as a family from Abraham to be these special people on earth that would reflect the glory of God. And by taking them out of the land, you take them away from all of that ability to even do that. And so they're kind of left with this question: well, really, what are we for? Who are we? What's our purpose in life? How can we exist like this? Because we don't, we don't really know who we are, what we're about, uh, what do we do in exile, and everything else with it. So it was an absolutely catastrophic moment. And Lamentations kind of describes that moment in kind of graphic detail in these poems. The four out of the five, the first four, one to four, are all acrostic poems. So they go alphabetically through the Hebrew alphabet, which is 22 characters long, and so there's 22 verses generally, particularly in one, two, and four, and they explain and explore, if you like, done deliberately, explore the pain of that lament, that grief that they feel at the loss of their culture, the world around them, the city, the temple. And it's done deliberately that way because it's kind of like going, our grief is complete. It's from A to Z, and this is the way we want to describe it. So that's what it's done. In chapter one, in the first poem, it's one and two are both one verse per letter of the alphabet, so 22 verses. Um, and chapter one talks about this kind of picture of Lady Zion, and where Jerusalem is likened to a widow without comfort, and really it just sort of says, God, please, we know that we may be responsible, but please bring your compassion, because this widow is just weeping and wailing and cannot be consoled, and only you can console her. So to look on her with the compassion and mercy that we know you have. The second poem talks about some of the sins which led to this, to God's wrath, to his anger that is just because they've broken the covenant relationship. and it acknowledges that we have done this, and that it's our own fault, if you like, that God is a God of justice, and that, he sent prophet after prophet and warning after warning over centuries, but we've just ignored it. And actually, it's our own fault that this has happened. But it's still, even though it's kind of saying, yeah, it's my fault, it's still recognizing the pain and the suffering that it causes, and that pain and that suffering is real, and it's horrendous, and it's overwhelming at times. But it's still asking then God for His compassion in those moments. Look at the pain, look at the suffering. And we're not even saying it's unjust. We're saying that it is just, but we still feel it, and we need your compassion to help us to get through it. In chapter three, the third poem, this is slightly different. It's longer, much longer, and it's 3 verses per letter. So that's 66 verses instead of the 22. So it's a lot longer out of the five different poems. And this describes a sort of a lonely man that's speaking out of grief at what he sees and experiences. And this one is unique because out in chapter three, it not just mentions the justice and the pain and the suffering that is and the grief, but it also leads to a hope as well. And there's these few verses in the middle where actually there is a moment of hope in the whole thing in these laments. They reason it like this: if God is faithful to his word in bringing justice, which he spoke through the prophets and so on, that he is true to his word about the covenants. And he said in, Deuteronomy 28, if you obey me, there'll be blessing. If you disobey the covenant that you signed up to, there are consequences, there are curses that will come. And so the author here kind of justifies it in a sense, or recognizing that, well, if God is faithful to that, and therefore what we see is the consequences of our disobedience over many, many, many years, then surely also God is faithful to his covenants too, and to the promises. And so it has these words of hope that are kind of spoken out of a God that is consistent, and that God will, yes, he'll be faithful to the judgment, but he's also faithful to the promises as well. Verse 19, it says, I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. And so, in the midst of this crying out in grief, you see, that this recognition that God is faithful. A little bit like the Psalms, in the lament Psalms, where, God, where are you? I'm wasting away, and I'm dying here. Yet, I will still praise you because I know that you are there and that you are faithful. And so the lament Psalms kind of continue that, and you see it here in the midst of the third one. The fourth poem goes back to the 1 verse per letter of the alphabet. And what it does is it contrasts the good old days with the terrible conditions now. So it kind of looks at, well, look at what the kings were like in the old days. They walked around in royal splendor. Now look at what they're like under siege here, and they're looking no better than we are, and they're starving like we are, and they're just a shadow of their former self. Do you remember the good old days when we used to party and everything was good? We have food on the tables. Look at us now. We're going hungry every night, and we're besieged. And what are we going to do? Remember the good old days when everybody looked at Israel or at Judah, and they marveled at how wonderful it was, and the wealth and the splendor and our army, and nobody could stand against us. Now look at us, where we've got the Babylonians at our door, and we can't even fight back. And so it does this contrast between the good old days of how wonderful it was and how disastrous a situation they are in now. And then the fifth one is the only one that's not an acrostic poem. It's the same length as 1, 2, and 4, so it's 22 verses long. But it's kind of deliberately taken out of acrostic A to Z, if you like, because it's trying to say that, we're now, our grief is so overwhelming, that it can't even go into any kind of order anymore. It just, those moments where grief just becomes so great within us that we just break down into kind of tears, and it's almost like we'd say somebody became uncontrollable in their grief. And it's trying to kind of put that in a dramatic way by saying, well, there's no order anymore. It's just complete chaos. It's uncontrollable grief, and it's a communal prayer for God's mercy in this uncontrollable grief that is happening all around. And then it lists kind of different groups of people, the widows and the orphans and the everybody that are suffering because of the siege of Jerusalem, and just how we can't go on, and they're just praying and hoping and asking God for help in this situation. And it finishes in that same vein. It finishes with these words: You, Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures from generation to generation. Why do you always forget us? Why do you forsake us so long? Restore us to yourself, Lord, that we may return. Renew our days as of old, unless you have utterly rejected us and are angry with us beyond measure. And that's how it finishes. So it doesn't finish with a note of optimism. It doesn't finish with any kind of hope for a future, that that God hasn't rejected us and there is a future hope. It finishes in this moment of complete and utter just despair, really, of what's going on. Because it really wants to say, I think, Lamentations above anything else, that grief is real, that suffering is real, that when we're in the midst of that, we don't know when it's going to end, and we don't know how it will be resolved. And actually it's kind of affirming that it's just okay to not be okay, that it's okay to be honest in all of this, that actually there are bad things that happen, and it's okay that God understands, and it's permissible to be in those moments where we just be honest with God and say, I don't know if I can carry on, and this is what it feels like, and God is okay with that. And sometimes that's where we are, that's where we need to stay, and that is just reality that we feel at that moment, and that's okay. And I think Lamentations and the author, whether it's Jeremiah or whoever, wants to kind of say, you know what, yeah, sometimes these things in life happen, and we know that God is there. There is that moment of optimism in the middle, but it's okay not to be okay, and God understands that too, and you don't have to pretend in any way. So that's the kind of the books, if you like, of Jeremiah and Lamentations, and a little bit about where we are, or where it kind of it finishes off, and how it kind of unfolds during this really tumultuous period in Judah's history, as they were besieged and then crumbled and fell, and they saw their whole nation destroyed and were taken off into exile.